Hey guys, if you're about to give your PLAB 2 exam, then here are 5 critical mistakes that you should absolutely avoid. Keep watching till the very end because I saved the best for last. Before we begin, full disclosure, I am not a GMC examiner and I do not speak on behalf of GMC or any other academies. The content of this video is going to be my personal opinion and that of my colleagues. So let's begin. Mistake number 1. Lack of empathy. The GMC came out with a fact sheet for PLAB 2 candidates about the do's and the don'ts for PLAB 2. They highlighted topics like sincerity, active listening, and stock phrases. So suffice to say, they want you to show them that you're a considerate doctor, and you can't do that if you use stock phrases or you rush the exam or you fake your empathy. So what are the solutions? I've been able to keep all of my patient interactions genuine and empathetic by thinking about how I would want a doctor to speak to my family or myself. Secondly, don't rush the exam. If you're in a hurry to finish the station, then you might miss out on the nonverbal cues and the examiner might think you're not an active listener. Take your time with the station. At best, you'll waste time. At worst, you'll lose marks. And finally, avoid using stock phrases. Now, because IMGs generally aren't native English speakers, there are things that get lost in translation. So you don't want to use rote learned phrases and repeat them in every single patient interaction that you have. Some academies, however, will teach you these phrases, and it's better to try and make these phrases your own. In the fact sheet, the GMC said that the examiners are more likely to be impressed by candidates that appear more natural when speaking as opposed to the ones that appear unnatural. So really, instead of memorizing the notes, you should be thinking about how you build your communication skills and come across as an empathetic doctor. Mistake number 2, lack of clear study goals. Now, what most candidates do is they come to the academy, take the course, try to memorize as much as they can, practice as much as they can, and sit the exam. But in reality, you need to be a bit more intentional with the way you spend your time. So the way I like to approach it is how, who, and what. So how long am I supposed to prepare for the exam? When I asked people that had passed in their first attempt, all of them agreed that 2 weeks of the academy and 4 weeks post-academy were more than enough of studying. Beyond this point, you begin to burn out and you don't see a good return on the time you put in. So you don't need to study for a whole 6 months or even a year. Instead, be very intentional, keep the time frame short and put yourself under a little bit of pressure so that you get the work done. Secondly, in terms of what are you actually supposed to study? Well, when I asked my colleagues, everyone unanimously agreed that stick to one academy and one resource. Some of the common mistakes I've seen candidates making is trying to use multiple resources like multiple academies, multiple manuals, university textbooks, Oxford handbooks, and that is just too much for the brain to handle. You want to stick to just one resource and rely on that fully. That being said, you can imagine how important it is to pick the right academy. But let me also highlight, picking an academy is not a make or break. We do know of candidates that have passed the exam without having taken any academy. This should be sort of an individual decision. Now, once you pick out a specific resource, you're going to want to understand the general format and then pick up on the general themes in every single system. You don't want to memorize the script word for word because in reality, you won't really have enough time to ask all of the questions. So you definitely want to ask about the red flags, the risk factors, patient expectations, and then you want to sort of customize your history to asking only the relevant questions for that specific station. In their fact sheet, the GMC also mentioned that you're not going to get extra points for asking irrelevant questions, so you might as well save your time and try to complete the station. And finally, who you're supposed to practice with. So try to practice with as many people as possible and in a semi-formal setting. If you just stick to the one person, then you might fall into a comfort zone and on the day of the exam, you might freak out under the pressure. So time yourself, practice in groups of 3. So one person is the candidate, the other is the simulator, and the third is the examiner, and then rotate between yourselves. That way you get to see the exam from various different angles and you can add a lot of depth to your preparation. Speaking of planning, third mistake would be not planning for your accommodation. Bad accommodation can come back to bite you in ways you wouldn't even think of. There are so many aspects that you should consider when finalizing your PLAB 2 accommodation. First one would be distance from the academy. You do not want to be an hour, 2 hours away from your academy because you're gonna be traveling back and forth and that time could have been spent studying for the exam. Secondly, if you're living very far away, you're gonna have to invest time in figuring out the transport system and you're always under stress about catching or missing your bus or train. Those costs can really add up towards the end of your journey. So be very mindful with your accommodation. Try to pick something that's close by, but it should also be comfortable because you don't want to live in absolute agony. Wi-Fi is a very important factor. Two of my friends had an accommodation with no Wi-Fi, and you can imagine the amount of stress they were under before an exam with no access to Google, online resources, or even Netflix and chill. So spend some time planning the kind of accommodation that you want, and can it give you a stress-free place to prepare for your exam? Moving on to number 4, not understanding what the station is asking of you. So in the fact sheet, the GMC pointed out that the candidates aren't understanding the instructions for the stations. So when you enter a station, don't assume that the station is going to be something you've done in your academy, because the GMC has several variations for the same station. They can also tell when you're using a rote-learned response. If the instructions ask you to address the examiner, then address the examiner and not the patient. If you're examining a mannequin, the instructions will tell you whether you need to speak to the mannequin or not. If you're talking about a child, make sure to get their pronouns correct. So don't call a he a she, and vice versa. Be very wary of offering analgesia in stations where you need to elicit a pain response. So these are some of the ones that I found very helpful reading through that fact sheet, but do give it a go yourself, because there's a ton of information in there that will help you prevent a lot of avoidable mistakes. Moving on to the 5th and final one, maximizing your visa potential. When you're in the UK on your standard visitor visa, you not only want to take the PLAB 2 exam, but you also want to get a clinical attachment at the same time. And the reason why I say that is looking at all of my colleagues and juniors coming in these days, people that had a clinical attachment got secured an NHS job way faster than the ones that didn't have one. For the ones that did have a clinical attachment, I've seen them securing a job within the first 3 to 4 months of applying, whereas people that didn't have a clinical attachment still haven't secured a job even after a whole year. So even though it isn't an official requirement on person specifications, it is a great way of showing the recruiters that you do have past NHS experience, and it sort of builds up credibility. If I had to do it all over again, what I would do is spend a whole month trying to find myself a clinical attachment, which by the way is not an easy task. It's a beast of a process. I recently helped some people secure a clinical attachment. If you want me to make a video detailing how to secure a clinical attachment, then comment below clinical attachment and I will do so. So I'd spent 1 month applying for a clinical attachment. Once I'd secured one, or perhaps I had gotten the momentum of applying to several places at the same time, at that point in time I would apply for my PLAB 2 exam, probably 3-4 months down the line. Apply for the visa, take the academy, post-academy prep, and after the exam I would complete a clinical attachment. That's probably how I would do it if I had to do the whole process all over again. So really think about how you can efficiently use your visitor visa to its fullest potential. Before I leave you, I do have a bonus tip. It goes without saying, but do visit your exam center a day before or a couple of days before the actual exam, and just see which trains or trams you have to take, which tickets you need to have, what do the machines require. Do they require contactless payments? Do you have a card? Do you need exact change? There are so many things that can go wrong on the day of the exam, and you do not want to deal with the stress of something going wrong on the day of the exam. We've talked about the major mistakes that I've seen people make on their PLAB 2 journeys, but what you really don't want to get wrong is your PLAB 2 visa application. So check out 5 the most common mistakes people make while applying for a PLAB 2 visa and avoid them. As always, I'll see you in the next one.